But yeah, no. So I'm actually going to be talking to you guys about Hungary, and it's all good. And it's really just going to be looking into really specifically, I guess, Articles 5 and 9 from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is basically about unlawful torture and unlawful arrest or exile. And so I don't know, does anyone remember, well, actually, I guess I was talking to the other class, so never mind. So, okay, I'll just get started because, yeah. Okay, so I guess, yeah, here we go. So we're going to be doing a case study of a fellow named Imre Nagy today. Imre Nagy is a really important figure in Hungarian history. It's because he basically has been branded as kind of this hero who stood up to communism. Has anyone ever heard of the Soviet Union or the USSR? Raise your hand. Yeah? Okay, good. So yeah, basically Hungary was a satellite state of the USSR. Their government was basically, how do I say this? Like controlled from Moscow. However, it was still an independent country. And so like the Communist Party was in power in Hungary, and Imre Nagy was actually a communist, but he had a lot of, I guess, radical ideas. He didn't want Hungary to be oppressed by the USSR any longer, and this was already in 1956. So the Soviet Union came into being in, well, I mean, it had been around, but Soviet Union came into Hungary in 1945. So this is like 10 years later or so where we're starting off. But basically, okay, yeah, so this is a map of Hungary, and it's, as you can see, it's like in Central Europe. However, it's kind of to the east, and this would be like where the Soviet Union was, because it's present-day Russia, as well as some territories like the Baltic states, Ukraine, and then satellite states like Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia at the time, now Czech Republic and Slovakia. So yeah, so it was a really big empire. Does anyone, like, has anyone heard of the Cold War? Yes? Yeah, okay, good. So this was a big part of that, right? So the US and the Soviet Union were kind of like big enemies or rivals, and there was, of course, reason for that. But anyway, the context, I guess, of this is that in 1945, after World War II, the Nazis had been in Hungary because Hungary had been allied with them. And that's kind of a lot to get into, so I'm not really going to touch on that, just that they were allies. But obviously, Germany lost, right? Hitler and the Nazis lost World War II. And the Soviets were on the side of the Americans and the British with the Allies. So they, since they were coming from the east, they liberated these countries like that are in the east on the Eastern Front, while the other allies, like the Western allies, liberated like France and Western Europe. And so they pushed the Nazis out, right, the Soviets, when they went into Hungary and to these other countries, and they actually pulled the communists in. So they, there was a, actually, before World War II broke out, there was a agreement between Hitler and Stalin, and they basically agreed that they wouldn't fight each other before World War II if war would come out. Obviously, this ended up, not being like a how do I say this, a stable promise. It wasn't permanent because Hitler decided to invade Russia, as we know. But in this pact, they decided to basically split Europe into two spheres of influence. Does anyone know what a sphere of influence is? Okay, yeah, good. Do you want to tell the class?
If you want to hear it too, for the rest of my class, hear it on the recording.
Okay, so a sphere of influence.
Yeah.
Okay, so a sphere of influence, I think, is basically kind of where a certain country or organization holds power over a certain area, the area it holds power over.
Very, very good definition. Exactly. So basically, these two countries, Germany and the Soviet Union, which is present-day Russia, and some other present-day states, they agreed that they would have these two spheres of influence. And so obviously Germany didn't get to have its sphere of influence because it lost the war, but Russia was still very much, or the Soviet Union with Stalin as the head, was very much, I guess, interested in having this idea. So as they were pushing the Nazis out and reconstructing Europe, they started to reconstruct or rebuild Eastern Europe according to their agenda. So the Communist Party gained power in Hungary, and communist policies were implemented, like collectivization of agriculture. That's basically when private agriculture, like people's own farms, were pooled and made public. So people had to work for them collectively. There's public ownership of industry, so like the state controlled different companies, and there was planning and economic planning. But there was also a lot of repression of public dissent. So a lot of people were actually held in a, so in Budapest, the capital of Hungary, it's like here, right here. In Budapest, capital of Hungary, there's a street called Andrássy út. And basically there's this house that people who were dissenters of communism were held if they, got caught and were tortured. This was pretty unlawful. And so it's actually a museum now called the House of Terror Museum. And I was able to see it last summer. It was really, really interesting. But in 1956, the revolution began on October 23rd. And this started with mainly student protests wanting national sovereignty. So it wasn't so much that they wanted communism out. They just wanted the Russians to leave. Like, they didn't want the Soviet Union to invade on national sovereignty. Hungary has a history of being invaded by different empires like the Ottomans, and then having to have joint control with the Habsburg Empire, with Austria-Hungary. So they wanted to have their own state finally. And the Soviets were making that impossible, right? So they also called for democracy, however, because there was this, pull or desire to be like the West. So Imre Nagy, sorry, someone's riding by on like a four-wheeler or something. Okay, so Imre Nagy was actually a communist leader. He had been in Russia during the First World War. He had helped with the Russian Revolution there, and he was really, diehard communist. However, he ended up having like reformist ideas later on. So he was born in 1896 south of Lake Balaton, which is in like the western side of Hungary. Lake Balaton is this huge lake. It's the largest freshwater lake in Central Europe. It's actually called the Hungarian Sea. Really nice place. Kind of looks like a seaside area if you go down to vacation there. And so he returned to Hungary after World War I. And when the communists were being persecuted in the interwar period, he actually left Hungary again, and he went back to Russia to study agriculture. And then in 1945, which is right after World War II, he became the Minister of Agriculture in Hungary, and he helped collectivize the country because, as I said before, he was a member of the Communist Party. He was obviously a leader. In 1953, he became the Prime Minister. However, he wanted to implement a different style of rule. So he started to become affected, I guess, by different ideas. So he didn't want to have so much agricultural collectivization, which was like a really big deal in the Soviet Union. And he actually wanted to push for more consumer products. So the consumer product is like something that, we would buy, like clothes or, food, not like military or, state products of being like, guns and producing stuff like that. He was seen as too radical maybe, or maybe not really like what the Soviet Union was wanting to do. So he was kicked out of the prime minister position in 1955 and actually kicked out of the Communist Party, which was like a big deal. And so in 1956, the revolution began. And on October 23rd, 1956, the demands were basically for the Soviets to get out, and they also wanted a more liberal government. They wanted Imre Nagy to be back and to be replaced as the prime minister. And so the Soviet Union was like, okay, what's the worst that could happen? We might as well like give in to these demands. And so he was replaced. And then like Soviet troops had already kind of been lining up at the border, and he basically asked them, to leave, like he had control of the country. But then he decided to announce an entirely new government system in Hungary. So it was not only, that the Soviets were going to leave, but then Hungary was going to be sovereign, but that it was going to be a multi-party system, more democratic, and that political prisoners who were being held, tortured, etc., would be freed. And the Soviet Union did not like that, because they thought that if Hungary was able to get away with this, then all the satellite states, like Poland and Czechoslovakia and all these places, would do the same thing, and then they wouldn't have control anymore. And so this was on November 1st when he proposed Hungary's exit from the Warsaw Pact. Has anyone ever heard of the Warsaw Pact? Awesome, yeah. So it's basically like a counter to NATO, right? A military alliance, collective security. And this was like this was the tip of the iceberg, or the straw that broke the camel's back for the Soviet Union. So on November 4th, 1956, the Soviet military actually intervened and went to Budapest, invaded, and about 2,500 people were killed. So this was a really big number. The people were astounded by the brutality of the fighting, and the West kind of looked on in horror to see that this was happening, especially because the communism, although it has a really negative connotation, the ideology itself is pretty humane, because it wants, equal property, equal sharing for everybody. So this really, even people who supported communism, this was like a big turnoff to see how violent it was. But he said that the fight is the fight for freedom by the Hungarian people against the Russian intervention, and it is possible that I shall only be able to stay at my post for 1 or 2 hours. The whole world will see how the Russian armed forces, contrary to all treaties and conventions, are crushing the resistance of the Hungarian people. So this was like a major deal, right? So this was actually announced, this was, I think, his last radio broadcast before he was caught and actually exiled. So he was arrested in 1956 by the Soviets. He was exiled and then secretly tried. However, so this goes against the whole, having a public fair trial. And then he was killed in 1958 and buried in an unmarked grave. And so this was a really kind of a sad way for someone to die, very disrespectful. They actually bound his legs with barbed wire, pretty brutal. And so this was like a big slap in the face. So anyone in Hungary who wanted, nationalism, or not nationalism, but we're patriots, I guess. And just one more thing, in 1989, does anyone know what's significant about 1989, that year in Europe, about what happened, with the Cold War?
The Berlin Wall came down?
Yeah, exactly. And it basically became a symbol of the end of the Cold War, right? So the spheres of influence were kind of retreated, and the Soviet Union collapsed, right? So that was kind of the start of it all. And in 1989, actually, in Hungary, there was an initiative to rebury Imre Nagy and actually give him a marked grave. And so they did that, and it was before the Berlin Wall came down, but it was a sign of this or growing unrest in the Eastern Bloc against the Soviet Union. And then, so I know that I mentioned a couple of the rights that were violated here in the beginning, but does anybody remember them, want to name them? Okay, yeah. I think you guys are still on mute, but yeah, just feel free to come to the camera or something, or say it out loud.
The right to not be tortured was violated.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Yeah, so it was, I actually didn't write these down here. I don't know why. But number 5, I think, is one to not be tortured or abused unjustly. Let's see here, I'm going to hide this right now. 19 is freedom of speech, right? So Imre Nagy and the Hungarian people weren't really able to say what they wanted for their country. 21 sort of serves as a promise to democracy. 30 was also ignored by the Soviets. I don't exactly remember what that one is, but I'm sure you guys probably know what it is. And 10, also, that was not given a public trial. He was arrested unjustly. So yeah, I think that's, let me end my shared screen, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so Anna, I can't remember, am I doing the conclusion or are you? Okay, cool. Then I will go back to shared screen. Sorry, guys. Just have to get that there. Oh, whoops. Okay, so, you know what, actually, yeah. Okay, I'll share screen again. And I guess just in conclusion, to say, so obviously human rights are like a big deal, but we can see that whether it's in the present, like with what Anna was talking about in Nicaragua, or in the past with Hungary, human rights have kind of been stepped on a lot. And it's kind of hard to see like why that is, because everyone kind of agrees that they're good things, these human rights. So I guess I hope that you guys get out of this that not all countries have the same definition of human rights, especially different history, and not all governments want to enforce it, because it means sometimes that they have to change what they believe in, or power. And having the universal human rights doctrine, as good as it is, does not mean that everybody in the world has access to these rights. So that's kind of like a big deal. We are very fortunate in the US, I think, have a lot of rights guaranteed to us. But yeah, do you guys have any questions for either me or Anna? Any clarification needed? No? It's fine. Anna, do you have anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just like these are always good discussions to have, and just I would think about them in your daily lives, and see, if you think even just people in your classroom, or are receiving maybe all the same rights, are being treated the same way, and if they are, think about why that is. Think about what institutions you have in place in your school, in your home, other parts of your life, and that allow for that. And then also think about, if you feel like your classmates or friends, aren't treated in this way, think about maybe why that is. And so, I mean, these are always just important things to be aware of. And while, Sylvia said we do have a universal human rights doctrine, it doesn't mean that we're really going to follow it. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, we would be happy to answer them. They can be about what we talked about. They can be about something different.
It can be about the countries themselves, I mean, just whatever.
Yeah, and they food or like sports or different things, and we'll try to answer as best as we can.
Yeah.
But we love to hear from you, and what questions you have, or just comments, or what surprised you and what didn't. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah. Oh, the food? Are you saying, I'm sorry, is the food? Okay. Anna, do you want to go first?
Well, my favorite thing to eat, a very common Nicaraguan dish, is pinto gallo, which is basically rice and beans with fried plantains. And it's cooked with different seasonings and stuff, but you essentially eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Some people eat it all 3 meals a day. I would have it for breakfast and for dinner. And it's just a good dish. But I eat a lot of like really good fried plantains and awesome food all the time. The region I was in, a mountain region in Nicaragua, which is known for their coffee. So I had a very, very good coffee every single day as well, which I loved it.
Yeah, so in Hungary, Hungary actually, ironically, like in Eastern Europe, is said to have like really good food. It like Germany and like some of these countries kind of around it don't really have a good rep. So Hungary is kind of seen as like a bright spot with that. We use a lot of spices. Has anyone here ever heard of paprika or paprika? Yeah. So that's like a main Hungarian export. It's definitely like a spice seasoning that we use a lot. A lot of the things in Hungary are like meat dishes. So something I really like to make. This is like a really kind of elaborate dish or celebratory dish. But when I was there this last summer, my uncle made me this really nice. So they had wild boar meat, which like wild boars are kind of indigenous to Hungary, and so he made this really delicious wild boar meat, and then we eat that with like jam. So with like blueberry jam or cranberry jam or something, and like potatoes, and soup is like a big deal in Hungary. You have to have soup before every time, like every lunch, like a soup, and then like an entree is considered to be a typical Hungarian lunch. And like if you don't have soup, then you like just didn't eat lunch. Like so, it's like a big deal. So we had soup before this meal. But yeah, I would say that stuff like that is like really good, and also the desserts are super yummy. We have a lot of pastries and a lot of stuff. Like I don't know, it's really easy to eat a lot there. Any other questions?
If you guys can maybe come up to the mic to ask your questions, we can't really hear you from the back of the room.
Oh, so when you
when you have a host family and stuff, like, what is that, and like, what's it like, and like, what's experience?
Anna, this is all on you.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I couldn't hear it. I think the sound was going in and out a little bit. Could you maybe like type it or say it one more time?
He asked about if you lived with a host family, and what is a host family, and what is that like?
Oh yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I maybe should have explained that earlier. Yeah. So I was at I lived with the host family, so that means that I was able to live with a family native to that area or that lives in that area from Nicaragua. So when I say like I had a host sister, I lived in a family with a mom, a daughter, and then the daughter's son. So I had a host sister and then like a host mom, and then I called him my like host nephew. And so basically it's really fun because you get to experience a more typical lifestyle, as if you were to maybe live in a hotel or some other arrangement. You wouldn't get to see maybe the inner workings of daily life. So we would eat breakfast together. We would have like a traditional breakfast or lunch, got to meet their family and have different celebrations with them. I was able to meet my host sister's friends, and we got along really well. So so living with a host family, I think, can be either a really great experience. Some people find it very difficult to integrate with your host family because you are from two very different worlds. Some people just don't get along and some people do. And I was really lucky, and I think I got to experience what a real daily routine of what it's like to live in Nicaragua, and also it helps my language skills. So my host mom didn't speak any English, and my host sister wouldn't speak English to me unless it was of like actual importance. And I didn't know any Spanish when I went. And so I had to learn pretty quickly. And so that it's really great for language skills as well. Yeah. Good question. I think host families are a great thing, but some people also don't have such good experiences sometimes. So I think it's important to recognize both viewpoints. And, I think coming into the situation, both parties, the host family and then you, have to be both like respectful and understanding of where the other is coming from. Yeah, awesome. All right. Let's see. Do we go until we have until 11:30? Are you all about, or do you go until 11:20? 11:30. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, do you have any questions for us?
Oh, come someone.
Oh, yeah.
What would you say was the biggest change in your daily life moving from there to Italy?
Yeah. Go ahead, Sylvia. If you want to talk first.
So biggest change in daily life from, you said America to where we were? That was the question. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, well, so for me, so I actually studied abroad in Vienna, Austria. But Hungary has always been like a place that I call home because a considerable amount of my family lives there. And so for me, it's like the biggest change, I guess, is just being able to see them. But also, I guess in general, like in Hungary, the routine of daily life is really different. So like lunch is the biggest meal of the day. And it's kind of like there's a lot of preparation that goes into lunch typically. So like, for instance, my grandmother, like she'll spend like 6 or 7 hours in the kitchen just to make lunch every day. For everybody, which is like, kind of a big deal. And I don't know, people get up early generally. A lot of people's jobs start pretty early. Like my uncle goes into work at like 6 a.m., but he's done at like 2 p.m. So it's like, it's really different scheduling. But yeah, I don't know. I guess for me, it's not, maybe not the best, maybe I'm not the best example because I have like family there, so it might be a little different. But when I was living in Austria, I had to get used to just also similar differences. Like people usually woke up a lot earlier than we tend to wake up, I think, are out and about more. Definitely like in Vienna, it's a lot of public transportation. So you would take the U-Bahn, which is like the subway, to class, or you'd walk there. People would bike a lot. Not many people use cars. And then, yeah, I don't know. I might have a better answer for this.
Yeah, I mean, it's different everywhere you go. I would say in Nicaragua, daily life, in some ways was similar, but and it's different. I think I lived in a city, so I could walk to work. Or I could bus to work. There were a lot of good systems. The buses, it's very interesting. They're actually old school buses, also referred to as chicken buses in Nicaragua. And so, yeah, the buses used to transport like within the city or even around the country are old school buses from the U.S. So the big yellow school bus you go to school in, that's what I took to work. And it's like a very it works, and it's a great way to, reuse materials. And so that was really interesting. Yeah, I think in some ways, yeah, it was the same. It was different. Going to the market and shopping. So they had grocery stores just like we do. But they also had some really nice outdoor markets where my host mom would go and get a lot of fruit and vegetables. And so I think you definitely see more women staying at home and taking care of children, doing housework and cleaning, but they do a lot for the families. And so I think I saw a little bit more of that. But yeah, I think, there are places to go out at night with your friends. There are great restaurants to go eat at. There's good street food. There were a lot of street food vendors. So it's like quick food that you can eat very quickly, and it's very tasty. Yeah, so I think daily life in some ways was very similar, but there are also little different things, like how you get to work, or what bus you take, or where you get food exactly. Yeah, they have a lot of different options, which is fun. Yeah, cool. All right, I think we might have time for one or two more questions. If you have any more.
Yep.
Any more questions? Yeah. All right. Well, it doesn't seem like there are any more, but we have really enjoyed speaking with you today. And I hope you could just think about what we said and, take it even past this class, and thanks again. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. It was fun talking to you. Bye.
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 And have a good day.